All right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever in the world you may be today. We are really excited for today's discussion, and we're excited to welcome you all back to another edition of SMWS Presents, where we get to sit down with some truly magnificent people in this amazing industry and pick their minds a little and, share a little bit of knowledge. And we are really looking forward to that. So today's guest is, this is very exciting. It's not every day that you get to sit down with somebody like Mr. Billy Walker, and it is a real honor to have him here with us today. He is somebody who has, lived and breathed this industry for nearly 50 years, and his wealth of knowledge is, truly immeasurable. And to be able to sit down, even for just an hour and ask questions and to really just sit down and talk whiskey is a real treat. And so we are really, really honored to, have him here with us today. So I will quit, gabbing about, and we'll get down to business here. And so without further ado, I welcome our, incredible guest, Mr. Billy Walker. Hello. It's so nice to see you. I'm sorry?
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for accepting the invitation. It's nice to see you.
And you.
It's good to be seen. So it's really exciting to sit down and talk with you today. And I will be filtering any questions that we get from our live viewers who are here and who have any questions for you. But this is just going to be a good old-fashioned whiskey talk, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. So I guess we will kind of kickstart with, your history and who you are and how you kind of came to be, sitting in that room that you're sitting in today. I know that you went to, I believe it was Glasgow University, if I'm not mistaken, to become a chemist. So did you grow up wanting to get into science, or was that something that you knew you wanted to go into so you could find your way into the whiskey industry? Or, were you just a kid, doing experiments and that sort of thing, and it just kind of led you that way? Can you touch on that a little?
Yeah, I can. Look, like any other kid from the west of Scotland, my ambition was to become a professional football player. And
that's awesome.
That didn't quite. That dream was not quite fulfilled. But anyway, yes, you're right. I went to Glasgow University and studied chemistry, focusing on organic chemistry. And when but it's also important to know that I was brought up in a whiskey town. I was educated and brought up in a town of Dumbarton, which was the then home of Ballantine's Scotch Whisky. They had, of course, the grain distillery there, and a couple of lowland distilleries, Lomond and Inverleven. So it was inevitable that there was a whiskey presence in the town, and almost everybody in the town was affected by whiskey, because as well as Ballantine's, we had J&B, we had Newton Bond, we had McGavigan's. So there was a big, in terms of employment, and there was a big influence on the town and the community from the whiskey industry. But en passant, having gone to university, I studied chemistry, as I said, focused on organic chemistry. And it wasn't my initial intention to enter the whiskey industry, although it was always in the back of my mind that there would be an opportunity. So for the first 4 or 5 years, 1967, I think, I joined a pharmaceutical company called Organo. We were focusing on some very interesting stuff. Particularly, it's still the dream today is to find a non-addictive painkiller, and we were doing a lot of work in that based on the steroid molecule, and it was really, really interesting. I worked with a really incredibly intelligent professor who had some wonderful ideas. And while we never quite cracked the non-addictive painkiller, in the process we discovered a neuromuscular blocking agent called Pavulon, which changed the whole. In fact, in many ways, changed the whole course of operation medicine. Up until that point, they used pancuronium bromide, which was the extract from a tree. They used that as the neuromuscular blocking agent for operations, but it had side effects. Particularly, it had arrhythmia problems with the heart. So that was a really nice experience. But the opportunity came to join Ballantyne's in Barton, and let's just say I wasn't slow to seize the opportunity. And I have to say, I had a fantastic time there because it's a great company. It was a company that allowed you opportunities. So I was involved in almost all aspects of the industry. Of course, fermentation and both malt and grain, distillation, blending, the chemistry of that, the analytical side of it, even the bottling and the warehousing. And they gave me a fantastic opportunity. And for just briefly, I left Ballantyne's and joined another pharmaceutical company, fermenting penicillin.
That's so interesting. Not many people can say that.
It was interesting in the sense that it was a much more difficult challenge. You didn't end up having to distill the product. You had to extract but it was interesting. But it wasn't. It didn't give me the excitement that I had experienced at Ballantyne's. And so Inverhouse Distillers came calling, who in these days were owned by an American company called Publica, who were based in Philadelphia. They were a really, really interesting, very enjoyable period in my life. I was with them as master blender for 6 years, and they offered enormous opportunities to do things, to experiment, push the envelope back a little bit. And during that period, the brands that you would relate to Inverhouse would be Penwinnie and Green Plaid, Inverhouse Green Plaid, MacArthur's. And just as I was, and they had on site, they had the Garnheath Grain Distillery and Glenflagler, which was a big single malt, and we used a lot of it in the blend. And as I left, just before I left Inverhouse, we acquired Bladnoch, which stayed in their ownership very briefly. And from there, I moved to a very, very small company called Burn Stewart, who had very few facilities, other than they had very, very clever minds. They understood the kind of dynamic of the industry, and eventually we had a management buyout of the business, and that allowed us then to buy Deanson Distillery and Tobermory Distillery, both of which we had to recommission. Certainly Deanson had to be recommissioned. We acquired that from the old Invergord company. And Tobermory, it was an acquisition from a private investor, but the distillery had been closed for about a couple of years, so we had quite a lot of work to do on it. And again, it was a great time. It was the excitement of resurrecting distilleries that, in the eyes of the then owners, had no future, was terrific. And it's nice to see now that, on reflection, they are on the market, they are in safe hands and doing very well. Anyway, the Burn Stewart experience continued till I think I was there for about 20 years, and eventually we sold the company. There's a number of reasons for that, but the timing was right. It was acquired by Angostura, and subsequently the distillery and the company has been sold on to Distell, the South African company. But that's by the by. So that left me, this is a 20-year period at Burn Stewart, which was absolutely fantastic. We did some really, really creative things. The industry, in fairness, the dynamic of the industry was also moving along at quite a pace. Anyway, I had a year where I reflected on, look, I need to do something. And we knew I had two partners that by this time I had kind of aligned. We had aligned ourselves, myself, Jeff Bell, and Wayne Kieswetter, who were first of all, I have to say, sublime partners. They were terrific. They were non-interferers. They were unbelievably supportive, but they had terrific knowledge of the African continent. So, you know, we had routes into market. We could see routes into market that perhaps some big companies will never fully understand. And having kind of got our thinking together, we decided, well, let's buy a distillery. This is a good time. And it's interesting that when we were buying, there was something like, this is only in 2004, there was something like 20 distilleries mothballed or closed. And so we had a conversation with Shivas Pernod, and they were quite sympathetic to the idea. And we acquired BenRiach with, I have to say, some fantastically interesting inventory, and spent a lot of time becoming familiar with the personality of BenRiach, and then recognizing in our own mind what it is we wanted to do, the direction we wanted to take it in, and the personality we wanted to evolve from what we were doing. And it was moving along nicely. The industry at the time was also the single malt, the boutique single malt part of this industry began to find its own dynamic. And in many ways, we were fortunate. Not sure that we can't claim to have made it, but we were part of it. I would have to say guys like Andrew Symington and Gordon MacPhail, the Lane brothers, Cadenheads, these companies and these individuals kind of got it. They got it early on how important the boutique side of the market could be, the personalizing of things, and the individuality. So we kind of were in at the right time. And I have to say, BenRiach was doing pretty well. We understood that our routes to market. Please stop me, by the way, if I'm talking too much.
No.
Our routes to market were quite different from the big companies. We were engaging with private, independent importers, wholesalers, and retailers who were getting right behind the brands. And the loyalty was both ways. Our kind of commitment was we would not sell into the multiple retailers. We would be loyal to this route to market. So BenRiach actually flourished. And then the opportunity to buy Glendronach came up. And obviously we had a
you
look at it.
You couldn't say no.
Well, there were one or two issues. They had closed. The distillery was closed, I think, between 1996 and 2002. So there was an inventory challenge in managing that gap. But it wasn't. We didn't see that as a problem. We just saw it as an opportunity to be flexible and work your way around it. I had known Glendronach. It was part of the William Teachers stable, and of course, Hiram Walker Allied bought William Teachers, so I was familiar with Glendronach. I also knew that in the early years, as I said earlier, that although single malt was a very small sector of the market, Glendronach was in there, and it would probably been maybe number 5, number 6 in terms of sales. And although it was a small market then, it did have a presence. It also had a personality. We didn't need to work at understanding who Glendronach was and who it should be. We had some work to do, though. The inventory was not consistent with the kind of plan we had, the personality and the DNA we wanted to develop for it. We wanted to bring it back to this significantly sherried style of whiskey with a big impact from the sherry maturation. And over the period 2008 to 2016, we absolutely focused on that, and we took it to a point where it was beginning to be quite successful, I think, and popular, and people liked the style of the whiskey. But it didn't come by accident. We spent a lot of time, spent a lot of work re-racking and following the development of the maturation process to ensure that we fully understood, what was happening between this rich spirit and a rich style of wood. In 2013, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I'm sure in purchasing a distillery, there's so much that goes into that. I'm sure there's so much research that goes into that. I'm also sure that they don't just sell a distillery to anyone. I don't know if I could show up in Scotland with a bag of money and they would sell me a distillery. I know that there is a level of responsibility, to keep the integrity.
That's a really, Jen, that's a really, really important point. Shivas saw us as safe hands. They were comfortable. They knew that we wouldn't do anything that would embarrass them or indeed embarrass the category. That's really important. And I'm focusing a lot on the liquid and the role of the master blender. I mean, there are many other things that we were doing in parallel. We were looking at, is the actual spirit cut where we want it to be? And we played around with that. But I mean, the most important driver in all of it was to develop the personality that we wanted for the releases. And that took some time, but we got there. But in the meantime, another distillery had come up, Glenglassaugh, and we were really, really keen to get Glenglassaugh. Interesting. I mean, the location of Glenglassaugh is beyond spectacular.
I have heard that from, I can't tell you how many people have said that exact thing about that particular distillery, that it's just in a magical little spot.
It's beyond spectacular, and it had been in the stewardship of the Edrington Group. It was then purchased by some Russians, and we were lucky enough to convince the Russians to sell to us. And so we bought Glenglassaugh in 2013, and we had a plan. It was a different style of spirit. It was a coastal spirit. All of the maturation was done on site, as it was in all of our distilleries. And so the expectation was that the microclimate, or even the semi-macroclimate, was going to be interesting and deliver some interesting, evolving and maturing spirit, as it turned out. And we had laid some wonderful foundations in terms of the styles of wood that we were encouraging the spirit into. Unfortunately, events caught up, and I was going to say we had to sell the business. We didn't have to sell the business, but it was helpful to my two partners to sell the business at that time. There were issues that. It was okay for them, and it was helpful for them to sell the business.
Right.
Sorry, I think I've lost you.
No, not at all. But you've mentioned, in just kind of reviving or reinventing these distilleries, that you have a plan. That the plan is to kind of move forward in a particular direction. How do you come up with that plan? When you have these distilleries who have been producing malt for so many years, are you going back and trying to do taste whiskeys that were made long ago to try and replicate that style? Or like, what is the process of kind of coming up with a plan on what type of spirit you're going to put out?
I think it's a really difficult question to answer because it's in my mind, but the kind of the sketch of the plan is what is it from our historical experience, both in terms of owning distilleries and from employees. What is it we've learned? The one thing we've learned, the one certainty, Jenna, is that if you make good spirit and you put it into good wood, you've got a real chance of something evolving that is going to be at least good. And hopefully, if you handle it properly and you follow the development and you understand where the sweet spots are, it will be better than very good. It will be spectacular. And that really is, that's the prize for us. In the case of all of the distilleries that we've interfaced with, the kind of, BenRiach was a lighter spirit, Glendronach was a bold spirit, and Glenglassaugh was classically a kind of in-between maritime located spirit. With when we passed on the ownership of BenRiach, Glenglassaugh, and Glendronach to Brown-Forman, who I have to say were great people to deal with and continue to be great people. I have nothing but kind words to say about the dealings we had in the transfer of ownership, and indeed the subsequent dealings we've had since that point. They've been very good people. But we were confronted with a need to do something. So again, I had a conversation with the people who are my team, and we are a team. You know, it's not just Billy Walker, it's Chris Savage, Alan Gilchrist, John Watt, David Keir. We had a number of conversations and said, look, guys, I think I can get another distillery. So another conversation with a charming man called Laurent Lacassagne, who is the MD of Chivas UK. And we came to an agreement, and it wasn't an easy discussion. But the importance for me was that when GlenAllachie became a possibility, from a blending point of view, I was very familiar with GlenAllachie. I knew it was not a shy spirit. It was quite a full-bodied, muscular spirit. So for me, that was ideal, because what we wanted to do was we were getting a distillery and a brand that was totally unexposed to the market. So there were no pluses and no minuses. The plus was it was a very, very nice distillery. The other plus was that I was familiar with the liquid and I knew exactly. I think I knew exactly kind of development we wanted and the journey we wanted to go on and where we wanted to take it. And so we had a blank sheet of paper, and our intention was, of course, to look at the inventory, check it out and be comfortable with it, and then to get it into the right style of wood. In this case, we are very keen that GlenAllachie is showcased as a brand that is spending a lot of time in sherry wood. And in many ways, that's where the journey's taken us. We're now almost 3 years into ownership. We've done a lot of really quite interesting, I was going to say clever, but that's pretentious. A lot of quite interesting experiences between the spirit and different styles of wood. And we're bringing these to the market, feeding them into the market. And, we're happy with where we are today. But the journey isn't over. Our objective.
It never is.
No, it's never over. In fact, first of all, you buy a ticket to get on the train. You're never sure if it's the express train or the scenic route. But it's likely that it's never the express train. It's always going to be probably the scenic route. I think we've got the inventory, the GlenAllachie inventory, about 90% of where we want it to be. The next 10% is a challenge, but we're very happy. We're happy, maybe even proud to have got where we are today. And as I say, the journey will continue. I mean, our kind of ultimate objective is for GlenAllachie to become the best single malt in Speyside. Now, there's a challenge.
Well, I think you're the man for it. I'm looking forward to seeing that come to fruition, as I'm sure many others are. But before we kind of jump into the GlenAllachie and in your role there and all the magic that happens there, I just wanted to make note of some of the folks who have joined us today from all over the world. Dave Bell is here, and Tina Stewart. We have folks from Texas. We have people here from Minnesota, northeast of Scotland. We have a very diverse group here, which is always a treat. And we have some folks who are making some great comments about your work over the years. And so you are well applauded here, sir. But to kind of jump back in purchasing a distillery that was kind of kept under a low profile, did you kind of I guess you take everything you've learned over the years and all of the experience that you've had, and you implement that into, just whatever the next project is. Is that kind of the process, or did you go into the GlenAllachie knowing you wanted to use sherry wood? Or sherry cask? Did you know that that was something that you wanted to do, or did you feel like the spirit just fit best into that type of wood?
Listen, I think we went into, first of all, we went into the experience to understand the nature of the inventory. Was the personality that I expected it to be? And the answer was yes. The kind of spread of maturing wood was, I mean, obviously, when we bought the distillery, we got an insight and a view as to what the style of the inventory and the kind of spread of wood casks we were buying. So that actually sowed some seeds. We then spent a lot of time, probably the first 6 months, looking at, I mean, virtually thousands of samples. And so we
That's a tough job.
Yes, you know,
it is.
And we then create a Bible understanding, how did this wood react with it? First, fresh American barrels, first, second fills, French wood, Spanish wood, sherry casks. So we knew what we had, but it was always my intention, because I knew the body of the spirit was that its personality would certainly be driven by sherry wood maturation. That was always my intention, and that will continue to be the objective of the business. So we spent a lot of time becoming familiar, understanding, checking. We'll do maybe 200-300 samples a week, even now, following the development of the various casks. We just released this week. We were looking at an experiment with some French virgin oak, some Spanish virgin oak, and some chinkapin virgin oak, and the whole kind of the kind of spread of flavour character that develops from each of these, just amazing. And that's the wonderful thing about whiskey, and it's what I said at the start: good spirit and good wood and good husbandry will give you some very, very good products.
Well, can we touch a little bit, if you don't mind, on the McNairs as well? I know we were talking before we came on a little bit about, just blended malts and, the impact that they've had on this industry and kind of the future of that. So will you kind of give us a little bit of backstory on McNairs and, maybe for those who aren't familiar with it, and what exactly, I know, but maybe, many others don't, what exactly is Limerick?
Limerick is the smoke that goes up a coal-fired or a peat-fired chimney. That's Limerick. And it's something that the people certainly in the Speyside area would have been very familiar with, and maybe are still very familiar with Limerick. McNair's, the actual brand McNair's, is quite interesting for me, because when I was at Ballantyne's, we owned the McNair's brand, and it was then a blended Scotch whisky, not a blended malt Scotch whisky, which was a category which did not exist under that name then. We would call it vatted malt, 100% malt, or indeed pure malt, 100% pure malt. Anyway, when the opportunity to acquire the company, the distillery, became available, we were very keen to acquire McNair's, and also a blended whisky called White Heather. And I can touch on that later if it's of interest to anybody. But we didn't want to reincarnate McNair's as a blended Scotch whisky, because that's very difficult territory for a small company. Blended whisky territory, tiptoeing into the kind of economic set of the big companies is not the cleverest thing to do. So we were keen to relaunch McNair's as a blended malt, vatted malt. But we also wanted to differentiate it by having a significant peated influence in the whiskey, and we've achieved that, and we've done it in such a way that in McNair's there are some interesting Islay peated malts. But there's also one or two interesting Speyside peated malts. Some names that you would surprise you that actually had the initiative to do some peated campaigns during the last 20 years, and continue to do it. And the big challenge for us, I mean, we believe that the products stand up to terrific scrutiny. The excellent 21-year-old was given a terrific.
I was going to say that won the big award.
Yeah, but the big challenge, unfortunately, the challenge for us with blended malt is that it's a category that is difficult to explain to the consumer. The people who understand whiskey understand blended malt, but the uninformed consumer probably doesn't understand it yet. But we are confident there will be a moment in time when blended malt will happen, and I don't think that McNair's will be found wanting, because it has the right balance. It's got we made sure there is some GlenAllachie presence in this blended malt, as I say, along with significant Islay and Speyside peated expressions, and we are very hopeful McNair's is at the start of maybe a slower journey. But
do you believe that just as consumer education, becomes, greater, and that we're just consuming more information, and we have the want to know everything about, the whiskeys we're drinking, that will change, that, much like single cask whiskeys, have kind of exploded, and that's kind of the thing, and that's something here at the Society that, we're lucky enough to get to talk about every day, are single cask whiskeys, and the joy and the magic of a single cask, and how it's, just this little snapshot in time, and it can never be recreated. And, that's all, at least I believe that a large part of that love for single cask is on education, because more people know about it. Do you believe that, that's eventually going to happen back? We're going to go back in time essentially, and we're going to feel the same way about, blended malts in the future.
I think it's possible, but it's important that one or two of the bigger companies have the courage to actually get interested in this category. Alternatively, we have to put more effort behind it, and there's good reason to do it. It's not without surprise that if you put together some very high quality malts, you'll end up. I mean, the challenge in blending is always 2 + 2 makes 5, and that's the ultimate challenge, and that's what you can achieve that equally with blended malt. But it's in its infancy. We continue to do some interesting tweaks. We're fascinated. We've done a lot of very interesting wood management with these blended malts, and the end of the journey is some way away, but it will be a very, very interesting end.
I always look at blending as almost like an artist creating a painting. So my husband's an artist, and I've watched him paint before, and it's just layer on layer, and it's tweaking this, and it's going back and, adding a little bit of this, or, it's always kind of changing the recipe, of his paints. And so I look at blending to be somewhat similar.
Maybe it's an orchestra, and you're bringing in the strings, and you bring in the drums, and you're bringing in the piano, and and of course, it's an art. And quite often, as a chemist, I'm quite often asked the question: is blending a science or an art? And the truth is, it's a bit of both. But if I had to go one way or the other, I would say put your money on it being an art, because it's a feel thing. It's something you feel is going to happen. It's good. I know if I do this, this should be the result. And if it's not, why is it not? And I go back again, have another look, and it's an art. Yeah.
So are you saying that, folks who maybe don't have a degree in chemistry can bring their artistry to the table and create beautiful blended malts as well.
Absolutely.
I'm asking for a friend.
Can I also just make the point that the benefit of having some knowledge of chemistry is that you can better understand some of the reasons why the art is effective. You can understand the kind of components that contribute, but making them work together, the magic of making them work together is definitely an art.
Well, I think that is an art that I need to take up. I will happily, trade in the paints and pens for, whiskey to play with. So I think that is a fun project in the future. Any tips on that's a great question, actually. I know that we have a lot of people at home who like to play around, and make their own little blends at home. Do you have any just quick tips for, anyone out there who's interested in, kind of creating little fun blends for themselves at home?
No, only have fun.
Have fun.
Yeah, and if you can categorize, if they're in their top game and they can categorize differences between the single malts, play around, and absolutely do your own thing, and test yourself, because you don't want it just that 1 and 1 makes 2. You want 1 and 1 to make 3, or there's really no point in doing it.
I think that's such a great way to look at it. And, I think whiskey, when I personally think of whiskey as a whole, there is so much fun to it. There are moments when you can, really get serious about it and, super technical about it. But, if somebody just were to ask me off the cuff what I think of whiskey, whiskey is magic and it is fun. And I know it's easy to kind of hype up that romanticized version of whiskey because, again, it's a business and there's, like anything, the not so fun parts about it. But I'm a firm believer of that as well, that whiskey should be fun.
Well, listen, it's got to be fun. And it's also the case that we're a boutique company and we celebrate difference and diversity. We do not expect, if we're making we did quite a big bottling of our 15-year-old expression, which I think is fantastic. But the next one will be in November, and we think there will be a difference, but it will be a movement to get even better. So we're not pursuing that everything should have a flat quality here. We want to be seeing the quality going like this and constantly going like this. And so we're always searching, we're reaching out all the time to deliver the best possible thing, mix, blend, single malt we can put into the bottle as possible.
So let's transition that, into innovation. And do you feel like I will definitely touch on your wood program and wood finishing. I know some of those are going to be making their way to the States soon, but I want to touch on innovation a little. Do you feel as though we have even scratched the surface of innovation in whiskey, or do you feel like that there is still just an abundance of opportunity out there to get creative and to create more just magical whiskeys?
Well, listen, I think there is opportunity to be creative. Of course, we are constrained by the rules and the definition of Scotch whisky. But the areas that we are focusing on is different styles of wood. For example, as I mentioned briefly, we launched a 3 series of different oak genuses. They were all 3 were virgin oak wood. They had all had a minimum of air drying for 24 months. The American, the Chinkapin, was 36 months. They all had medium toast and medium plus char, and so we know that you have to be careful when you introduce. Let's say, I think it was 7 or 8-year-old spirit into virgin oak wood. This is rich wood. It's got a lot to deliver, and you've got to monitor it and follow it closely, and find sweet point and be clever enough to know how near or when that sweet point is going to happen. This kind of initiative is relatively new to our industry. We were, I suspect, up until about 10 years ago, a pretty conservative industry. Maybe the informed consumers, and there are many, many informed and very aware consumers who are now setting challenges to us. Do something different. Let's see, push the envelope back a little bit. Yes, we are doing a lot of work. We're doing a lot of work. We're moving it sometimes from into 1, 2, 3 casks during the whole period of the maturation. We're looking at some interesting, I mean, for example, we will look at some Russian wood next year. We'll look at some Scottish oak, which is very, very difficult to cooper. It's the oak trees in Scotland are short, so the coopers hate working with Scotch oak. They don't get enough staves out of it. There's too many knots in the wood, but it's interesting, and we think really we should at least be able to offer something that has had the full Scottish experience, including Scottish oak. But we're going to look at the Russian oak. We will certainly look at a much more in-depth work with Mizunara, Japanese oak, and look at some Bulgarian and Hungarian. We've got lots of ideas in the box, and we're looking at some wonderfully nice fine wine casks, which there's going to be a couple coming to the United States next year. There's going to be a Rioja style cask, and Grattamacco Italian Tuscany wine, wonderful wine. And I'm following these, and I'm absolutely chuffed. They are developing beautifully. By the time they're ready to go to bottle next year, they will be terrific. I'm almost salivating at the thought.
Is wood management, is this something that you have a team of people, kind of coming up with these ideas, or, how do you do you explore all of these? So let's say you want to go into wine cask. Are you, drinking all of these wines and, researching them? Are you, when you want to do a port cask, are you exploring port? So at night, are you having, a flight of port to figure out kind of which direction you want to go? What is the process of researching, all of these options when it comes to wood? Is that something that you personally take on? Or is that something that you...
I absolutely take that on, but I'm not alone in the journey. The distillery team are a very important part of that, including our operations director, Richard Beattie, and our warehouse supervisor, Lindsay Comries. These guys are fantastic, but they have to be part of it because they will be part of the patrolling experience and the sampling experience, checking it out. In terms of researching, we tend to only, there's two kinds of wood management. There's the various sherries, there's various oak genuses, and then there's the various wines, and the wines can be in American oak, they can be in French oak, they can be in Spanish oak, they can be in Hungarian. So we tend to be a little bit conservative in terms of trying to seek out the best in the league. If we can get a hold of the casks that are top end, Premier Cru, Premier Grand Cru, the best ports, the best sherry wines, that's the kind of target. I'm not saying we always achieve it, but we always achieve getting good wood. And we will examine anything and everything. Before we put any liquid into it, we will have nosed it and made sure that there are no off notes. It has travelled and carried well, and we will be comfortable to start the journey with this wood.
That's so fascinating that, just over the years, you've, really been able to train your nose and palate to just be able to nose a cask and know, this is not up to par, or this is going to make a beautiful spirit. That's really fascinating.
No, I think we've done okay. But
yeah, all the awards that you've, wrapped up, done all right.
It is experience, and in terms of the wood that's arriving from the various different countries, we try to have it arriving and filled virtually immediately on arrival. We're anxious about the wood actually hesitating in the barrel park for for an extended period of time. We try to have the wood coming in and we fill it within, let's say, 24, 40 hours.
And
So
how often are you testing those? So let's say once you fill, let's say you've filled a sherry cask, and how long do you wait until you go back to sample that for the first time, just to kind of see how it's evolving?
It's a really good question, and what I'm going to tell you is from my own experience. The first test will probably be about 2 to 3 months in, just to understand that the wood and the whiskey are indeed in harmony. And then we'll test probably every 6 months, and we will get to a point where we plan to use this whiskey, and then we will focus in. Once we believe the cask is getting somewhere near the point of being needed or should be bottled, we will focus in on a much more regular testing to make sure that it's fulfilling our expectation and it's ready.
Okay, that's good. I'm gonna bank that in my knowledge bank.
And we have a Bible. We have a Bible that records every test that we've done, our thoughts, and indeed our predicted thoughts, as well as our present thoughts and our historic thoughts. What our predicted thoughts will be that this will need a couple of years. For example, we know that most wines have to be in cask for a minimum of 2 years. It would be wonderful if we had the opportunity and the patience to have them in for 5 or 6 years, because the wine delivery is just a little bit slower than some other styles of cask. So a lot of it is experience, and a lot of it is patience, and a lot of it's patience.
It's definitely the long game, and so
it's the long game.
Yeah, it really is, and so you have essentially what you called a Bible for each cask. So every time you're going back to taste, each of these casks, you have essentially all of this information of notes from you or your team packed into that. Wow. That's got to be really interesting to, as you're bottling a particular cask, to go back and look at those first notes and make that comparison of, how it's evolved.
Unbelievably helpful. It's tracking the development of the cask virtually from birth, and it's great. It's such a help. Requires a lot of work, and again, and diligence, patience. We're not very good at that in Scotland.
So, in kind of wrapping up our talk on wood finishing, I know you've done rye, muscatel, port, Pedro Jimenez. You've done the whole, and you've kind of filled us in on what the future looks like. And so, is this something that we can always expect from GlenAllachie? Is this wood program, this wood finishing, always going to be part of the portfolio?
Yes, I think it's the nature of who we are. It's the anatomy of who our personality is. We think we will always occupy the kind of boutique style whiskey distillery company. We have no great ambition to be a mass producer. We frankly fascinate ourselves, and we are fascinated by some of the experiments we do and some of the surprises we get. And that's it's not just for the consumer. It gives us terrific interest and delight as well to see some of the things that it's a kind of, when you have a wow moment, it's fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, one of the styles wine finishes that's coming to the States sometime next year is we have been maturing or finishing in Gratamaco casks, and they are stunning. And there are some Premier Cru class French casks that we are following very closely. They're absolutely amazing. And this is what's wonderful about the challenges and what you can do with whiskey, is that there are so many different things that you can do, and you can spring so many surprises by using some very interesting and differential wood.
And do you see the industry as a whole, the regulations kind of expanding and, more opportunities to use new things, or do you feel like that, within the bounds of the regulations we have, people just getting more creative on how to use what they have, to make fascinating
Yeah,
whiskeys?
I think what's happened in the last 10 years is that people have, by necessity, probably had to be a little bit more inventive to engage with the market, particularly the boutique markets. The rules are very specific. We know that there's very tight rules. You can only use oak casks. You can only use specific oak casks that have a history of maturing Scotch whisky. So go back to the very start of the conversation. If you make good whisky and you put it into good wood and interesting wood, there's no question you will deliver for yourself some very, very top-end whisky.
Wow, I'm excited to start blending here, and I need to go out and work on my wood management. I think I'm up for the challenge.
All right.
I do have a quick question from Dave Bell. He asked you, does Mr. Walker keep his own Infinity or Solera bottle? Is that something that
No,
you have?
it's not quite. That's not quite, but there are just sometimes during the whole kind of evaluation experience, you come across some casks that are just stunning, and you can explain why they may be very good, but sometimes it's very difficult to explain why they are spectacularly stunning, and we do tend to have a look at these, maybe keep some library samples of these just to remind ourselves how we got to that point.
Well, you have to, I think it's interesting especially when you talk about, reviving distilleries or, reinventing distilleries, which, you've clearly done quite well, to be able to have those samples that are still there that, somebody, thought of that exact same thing, like, oh, I should probably put some of these away. So then you can go back and reference, these historical samples. I think that's a very smart trick.
Listen, when you get some additionality surprising, it's great. The expectation is that you're going to get good whiskey, but just occasionally you get casks, and it's almost without explanation. I remember having a conversation with some people when we were talking about BenRiach in the Dunnage warehouse. We had two identical casks in the same style of wood next door to you, lying, just sitting, resting next to each other, and they were totally different. But absolutely the same wood, the same microclimate, the same humidity, but they were different and quite different. And that's the wonder of whiskey. You can have this expectation, and sometimes it exceeds, and sometimes you think, what happened there?
That's the beauty, and that's honestly every day, to be able to talk about, cask, and essentially a single cask is, I love telling that story that you can have two, identical casks, essentially the same spirit from the same run, right next to each other, and like you said, they can taste completely different. And
it's wonderful.
You think in your head, well, how can that be? This is the same spirit and this is the same type of wood. We should be able to, create thousands of these if everything's the same. But is that the magic?
Well, it is magic. It is magic. But it's also the case that every cask also has its own personality. Although the kind of genus is the same, the cooperage is the same, the kind of the formation, the size of the spores in the wood, everything, you don't fully appreciate that. Yeah, it can be different. You think it's the same, and it should be the same, but you know what? It's not the same.
It's like I always make the reference of, like when your mom makes you a sandwich and it's like the best sandwich you've ever had versus when you make the exact same sandwich, it just doesn't taste the same. I don't know if it's that level of love or if it's, like we talked about, just that magic that happens inside the cask, or there's just something about it that, is a little
Mindset.
different.
We have generally in the industry, the best time to taste and nose is somewhere between 9 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock, where your palate is probably at its freshest and most underloaded. If you taste something at 11 o'clock and taste something at 8 o'clock in the evening, it can be quite different, So if you're comparing things, it's very important that your comparison is probably made at the same time and the same kind of environmental experience. So yeah, listen, it's life.
I have one other question for you from Alistair Gray. Alistair asked, are there any plans in the next year to add any new whiskies to the current core range?
Yeah, I think we're in the process of going to launch a 21-year-old, and that will be. I'm going up to the distillery tomorrow to check out the vatting. I know that I've done a pilot. I did a pilot on this particular expression 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we've actually done the vatting yesterday or today, and I'm going to go up to just check it out before we release it for bottling. It'll be very limited. There'll be about 300 cases, 1,800 bottles a year. It'll be at cask strength. Tell Alistair this will definitely be at cask strength, and it'll be in batch. So this year it'll be batch 1, next year it'll be batch 2, batch 3. But having done the pilot, he won't be disappointed.
So these will go out to the UK and then also here to the States, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And next year we will launch 30-year-old. Again, it'll be a limited volume. But it'll be nice. And look, we're constantly looking at. In the inventory, there are so many good things coming through just now that I don't have enough time to explain, and I would choose not to anyway. But there are so many interesting things that we've done that are going to come to fruition over the next probably 12 to 24 months. And I know that Alistair comes to the distillery quite often.
He just mentioned he'll come help you taste that 21 year if you need help.
Tell him I'm up tomorrow doing checking that. Anyway, we'll probably test these by putting a sample through one of the casks through the bottle you're on at the distillery and get feedback and move on from there. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff. We don't want to flood the market, but there's a lot of stuff coming through that, listen, as a team, we will be more than proud having our name attached to it.
And I have one other question from Johnny, my fellow California friend from Whiskey and Donuts, which I'm sure you know. He asked, when can we expect the peated whiskey GlenAllachie created early last year?
It's a good question, and I've spent quite a lot of time, again, doing some trial work. And there's going to be some interesting derivatives on the peated side. I think we might be able to bring the peated GlenAllachie to the market as a 4 or a 5-year-old, maybe. The signs are good. From our own experience, we know that we put a lot of the peated in American virgin oak casks, and the peat in the virgin oak, they give you a beautiful ensemble and marriage. So we might be able to bring it as a 4 or 5-year-old. But in parallel, we've taken a very, very rich peated cut from the still, which will come out as a very, very limited release. And I think, I had a look at it last week. It's 2 years old now. So you could almost release it now. And it's not legal, of course. But in terms of the characteristics, the body and the flavour, it's fantastic.
So I have a question about that, actually, because, over probably, I'd say, the past year, I've had some younger, and by younger I mean under 10 years, peated malts that have been just absolutely outstanding. And I find myself kind of gravitating more toward that younger, you know, peated spirit, just because I think that there's so much character, especially in single cask, there's so much character in there and they're so alive. Do you kind of agree with that? Or what is it about these younger peated whiskeys,
I totally agree, but in parallel, it has to have been configured in good quality wood. The beauty of younger peated malt is that the peat is very, very vibrant. It's alive. As it moves from young to maybe 12-year-old to older, the influence, the flavour, the organoleptic influence of the flavour begins to tail off. It doesn't become poor. It just becomes a different peat presence. But if you want something that's punchy, lively and dynamic, young peat is amazing. There's no question.
It really is. And, but there is also a beauty to those older ones as well. They get so soft and, just, that's the best way for me to describe it. It's just like a soft, like pillow of peat. And sometimes that's what you need at the end of a day is, something a little more, soft and decadent. But I'm glad I got to pick your brain a little bit on that.
Young, there's no question you can get a lot of life, a lot of value out of a young peated expression.
And do you feel that way about just whiskey in general? Because this is something I've noticed as well is, non-age statements or, younger whiskeys being brought to market. I've had some younger whiskeys that have blown me away. I've been absolutely, floored by them. Do you believe that just we're creating a better quality of whiskey, again, like you said, better wood with better spirit, therefore creating, a better end product? Do you see more young whiskeys kind of coming to market, or what is your kind of hot take on that?
Really, look, it's a really difficult question. I am an absolute fan of age statements. You have to be truthful and honest with the consumer, and tell them exactly what is in the bottle. There are so many things I can say about this, and none of them are uncomplimentary about young whiskey. But as a blender, it's nice to try and capture some of the vibrancy of young whiskies, and that can be done even by moving it through to being older, but putting it in wood that is less dynamic and less interactive. For example, you might want to include 5% of a 12-year-old that's been in a second or a third fill cask, which has kept some of its chemical vibrancy and hasn't been softened by the richness of the wood. So there's a whole number of ways of delivering the kind of things you're looking for. You know what Shakespeare said? Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
That is a really great outlook to have, to overthink things. And, if it's a great spirit, it's a great spirit and it should be enjoyed.
Absolutely. Young or old?
Yes, young or old. I agree. So, well, Mr. Walker, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. This was an absolute treat. I hope, when the world kind of resumes to some sense of, normalcy, I can come for a visit and sit in that very room and pick your brain a little bit more about this fascinating industry and, what you've done to make such a big impact on it. So to have an hour with you has been truly an honor. So thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Well, Jenny, just let me say thank you for inviting me. And yes, the world will come back to normal. There is, as the sun sets and the sun rises, there will be a normality again, and you will be an honoured guest when you arrive.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to it. Are there any kind of parting words you would like to leave us with, or anything exciting in the pipeline that you would like to share?
I think really what is exciting for us is that, as you probably know, we've got a new importer, Impex, in relatively new importer in the States, and they are very exciting people. They're very energetic and exciting people, and I hope that, and I'm very confident that our full range of products will be exposed to the American market, and we look forward to that.
Well, we look forward to it as well. So again, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who joined us this morning.
Yeah.
I know it's early here on the West Coast, so this was truly such a great way to start the day. So I thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
We'll see you all
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.